In any organization or entity, disputes may arise, but there should be defined avenues in order to deal with such disputes. And in many instances, that's not necessarily clear. Well, this morning, to actually speak to me about how disputes should actually be resolved, especially as it relates to the conduct within credit unions, I'm joined by the president of the Co-operative Credit Union League, Mr. Joseph Remy. Good morning, sir.
Hi, good morning to you and good morning to the listeners and the viewers. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about how we supposed to conduct our business in the cooperative credit union movement.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for joining me. Now, the first issue, of course, the latest example that we can speak of as it relates to conduct is with the Works Credit Union, and an issue arising out of meetings with two members actually feeling as though the bylaws are not being adhered to. They are suggesting that the meeting could not go ahead because the credit union did not have a quorum. Could you just actually define for us what is a quorum, and is it necessary for that to be in place in order for a meeting, especially as it relates to credit unions, to be conducted?
Okay, in the cooperative credit union movement, we are guided by the provisions of the Cooperative Societies Act. And all bylaws of credit unions are drawn from the Cooperative Societies Act. So the bylaws takes feed from the Cooperative Societies Act. And every credit union has bylaws that speaks to the issue of what should constitute a quorum for a general meeting. And there are two ways that you can hold general meeting. You have the annual general meeting, which is prescribed by law, where you have an obligation to report to your membership every year on the conduct and the business and the operations of the credit union. And then you have provisions where special general meetings are called. And these special general meetings are to deal with issues that the membership will have to give sanction to, approval to. And in each credit union, there are specific provisions where a quorum is spelled out. Some may vary, but the standard practice in most credit unions is that a quorum should constitute a certain percentage of your membership. So it all depends on the size of the credit union's membership. And we subscribe to those principles because it is set in the regulations of the Cooperative Societies Act. In the Works Credit Union issue, I don't know what their specific bylaws spoke to in terms of the numbers, but from the report that we had, the meeting was properly constituted, and as such, the meeting went on the basis of what was the requirement. What would have happened if there was a challenge to the quorum of the meeting or in any meeting? Then there are steps by which I believe those things should be rectified. One, we are subjected to the rules of the regulator, and as such, once there are representatives from the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, then though that is the area where the issue of the quorum should have been raised from the onset of the meeting. So the first thing is that if at the beginning of the meeting, any member realizes or is of the view that the meeting is not properly constituted, and there are representatives from the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, who is the regulator for credit unions on the basis of the provision of the Act, then they should raise those issues on concern with the regulator and have that issue rectified before the meeting is allowed to progress. Because once the meeting progresses, I suggest if there is no quorum, and I'm saying I'm taking it from both angles, if there is no quorum and the meeting progresses with the guidance of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, then implied in that is that you are allowing the meeting to progress unconstitutionally. But once the Commissioner's office gives sanction and that there's a proper quorum, then the meeting should be conducted because it is under the provisions of the Cooperative Societies Act that they would have given that guidance. And from where I sit, I was told, because we had representatives who sat at that meeting,
yes,
we can't sanction anybody from the league. I just want to make that elucidate clear upfront. What the league can do is provide training and guidance in terms of how to conduct general meetings. And what the report was that the meeting started, the meeting continued, and then there were issues that arose during the course of the meeting, which could have been resolved in a more amicable manner from our perspective.
Well, based off of the report, which suggests that one member actually tried to lunge at one of the members of the board during that meeting, I certainly hope that is not true. That is just rumor that is being spread. But in any of these meetings that take place or that are convened as it relates to the business of the credit union, does a representative of the commissioner, a representative of the commissioner from, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned a regulator, do they have to be present? Is it mandatory that they are present at such meetings?
It is a provision of the Act, and they, as the regulator, should be there to give guidance and to ensure that the meeting subscribes and follows the provisions of the Cooperative Societies Act and its subsidiary legislation, which is the regulations that guides the way how those meetings are supposed to be conducted. And that is a provision that has been operated within the movement ever since I have been involved in the cooperative credit union movement, which has been over 30 years now. And as far as I'm aware, the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, the first thing is that in some of those general meetings, there has to be clearance given by the Office of the Commissioner for the conduct of those meetings. And thereafter, their representative is present to ensure that the rules and the regulations and the laws of the country are adhered to based on the provisions of the Act.
Furthermore, what are your thoughts on the suggestions by one Mr. Fitzroy Otley that the Credit Union Act, well, according to him, by the government, is a piece of legislation the movement had already condemned and the government withdrawn? We've quoted this act during this conversation this morning. What are your thoughts on Mr. Fitzroy Otley's comments?
Well, unfortunately, as we said in our release, if we could recall during the period 2010, if I could recall it exactly, that was the year, when that piece of legislation was brought to Parliament, the cooperative credit union movement, for the first time in my history, would have been able to mobilize, and we challenged the veracity of that bill because we were of the firm belief that the bill in that construct was going to be inimical to the best interests of the credit union movement. And as such, we challenged the bill. Eventually, the bill was withdrawn from Parliament, and our public slogan at that time was "Bin the Bill," which means the bill should be confined to the dustbin of legislative history. And we did go along on that promise. We had over 1,000 credit union members mobilized outside of Parliament, where we challenged that bill, and that bill was subsequently withdrawn. What is taking place now is discussion is going on with representatives from the movement on the development of a policy proposal document that will guide the development of a new cooperative authority that will be the legislative arm that will regulate and supervise credit unions. There is no bill at the moment at this time. So calling for any bill that was there in the past, to me, it does not really make any sense. It is not a piece of logic. So there is no act that could be enshrined now because there is no bill before Parliament relative to the conduct of credit unions. What we have is discussion sanctioned by the government. We have a cabinet-appointed committee that is now discussing what kind of legislative framework we should have for the conduct and supervision of credit unions in the future.
But then, sir, if there's no act as it stands, because I know you said there's a cabinet-appointed committee, but if there's no act currently as we speak, precisely on what grounds are we being actually, especially as it relates to legal ramifications, how is it that the league has an idea of how to operate? Is it just based off of advice received? If there's actually no written documents to suggest this is what by law has to be done or should be done?
Let me correct that. I was referring to the statement made by Mr. Utley.
Okay.
He said that the government should bring the Credit Union Act. There is no Credit Union Act. There's a Cooperative Societies Act that has been the backbone of the legislative regime for credit unions over the years. There have been attempts to amend the Act. There have been attempts to replace the Act. But as far as we are governed by the provisions of the Cooperative Societies Act and its subsidiary legislation, which is the regulation. But the Credit Union Act that Mr. Utley spoke to, there is no Credit Union Act that is in existence at this time. That is what I was specifically referring to.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Now, as it relates to legal authority in dealing with such issues, especially allegations which may lead to legal ramifications, is there an authority that is actually set to deal with such issues?
When you say that if there are disputes and issues within the movement?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, under the provisions of the Cooperative Societies Act, there are provisions for the resolution of disputes, and those are the provisions that guides the way how disputes are resolved and settled. Albeit there are times that, and we at the league also have issues in terms of the timelines, the effectiveness and the efficiency of that process. And we have made that publicly known. And that is one of the areas that the committee is looking at in terms of a dispute resolution process now that will govern how we handle disputes within the movement. But at the present time, disputes are to be resolved under the provisions of the Cooperative Societies Act through the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development. What we try to encourage credit unions to do is to engage in mutual discussions, how we could see that we could determine some of those issues without it having to be referred to the Commissioner's office in the first instance, and secondly, without it having to raise head in the public space. And we believe that there are provisions at times, sometimes they are insufficient in terms of how the time it takes to have those disputes resolved, but we are confident that there is a provision at this time, and it should be utilized to its fullest before we can say that the process, it has not been satisfied. So you have to allow the process to take place before you could raise questions about the process.
Now, you've mentioned the Commissioner for Cooperative Development. And I just need, if you can kindly elaborate on the specific rules or what duties is actually conducted by the Commissioner for Cooperative Development.
Okay, the Commissioner Office, the Act, the Cooperative Societies Act, governs the affairs of credit unions. And under the Act, the Commissioner, as the head of that department, has the responsibility to be the regulator for cooperative societies. And as such, the Commissioner's Office is enshrined with certain powers under the provisions of the Act. And let me just read quickly from the provisions of the Act that speaks to the role of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, so at least people could be aware, right? The Act says there shall be a Commissioner for Cooperative Development, hereafter called the Commissioner, who shall have general powers of supervision of the affairs of societies and perform the duties of Registrar of Societies. And the Commissioner has, in the exercise of his powers of supervision, the Commissioner may, on his own motion, hold an inquiry into the constitution, operation, and financial position of that society, or on the application of a creditor of the society. They can do that. And when having held that inquiry, they can, if they have the opinion that the board has mismanaged the affairs of the society, or otherwise performed their duties improperly, they may be by notice of the society call upon it to remedy the situation. The Commissioner also has the powers if a society fails to comply with the notice referred to in that subsection. They may dissolve the board and direct that the affairs of the society be managed by such persons as he may appoint for a period not exceeding 2 years. So the Commissioner has overriding regulatory powers over the affairs of credit unions, and there are other provisions of the Act, and that is what we are guided by at this time, until and unless there is a new piece of legislation that governs the affairs of credit unions.
And how is this individual or individuals appointed, or are they elected to the Commissioner for Cooperative Development?
At present, the Commissioner, the Cooperative Development Division resides under a line ministry. And from our knowledge, it is a public service position that is appointed through the public, I would believe, through the provision of the Public Service Act and those things. So that is one of the areas that we saw and we felt was necessary for us to look at how we could amend the Act to make the provisions more independent. So what we have proposed now and has been accepted in principle by the government is that there should be an independent cooperative authority that should govern the affairs of credit unions. So we are now working on the policy proposal document to guide it in that way. So we will remove the Office of the Commissioner from being a public servant and place it into the hand of a registrar that has some kind of legislative powers under an Act of Parliament that gives it some level of independence. But at present, it is a public service position that the Commissioner for Cooperative holds.
And is there any expected completed date for this particular policy document to actually be complete?
Well, we are presently working with a deadline of between June to September. Hopefully that policy proposal document would be in the public space, when I say public space, with credit unions to comment on it, because they are process by which this thing's supposed to take place. That means that the policy proposal document is supposed to be circulated throughout the entire credit union movement, and there would be an opportunity for public discussion by credit unions on the policy proposal document before it goes to the drafters to bring up bill, a cooperative authority bill, which then is going to be again given placed for public consideration, and then that is going to go to Parliament for an act. So I anticipate that based on the way our legislation is done in this country, that it may take a few months again before that process is completed. But right now we are in the process of finalizing that policy proposal document before it goes to the credit unions for their consideration. It will take some time.
Now, my final question to you, Mr. Remy, and once more, thank you very much for joining me and for sharing this information with us so that we have a better understanding as per the operations of the credit union and the Cooperative Credit Union League. Specifically, this matter, as an example taking place with the Works Credit Union, the impact that it may have on its members, especially as it relates to the allegations that have arisen, and members' monies within the credit union. Could we reassure members this morning that their monies are indeed safe and investments are secured?
Let me say, without fear of contradiction, that the credit union movement in Trinidad and Tobago is very stable, and it is a very viable option. There may be a few instances that have reared its head in the public domain, just as in any other business enterprise. So we are not alone in this situation. It is something that we are not comfortable with as the league, and we did say it publicly, because we are of the firm belief that the credit union movement is based on some foundational principles that talks about ethical behavior and conduct. And from where we sit at the league, the credit union movement is very stable. The financial status of all credit unions have been verified by their annual general meetings and their financial reports, which demonstrates that all credit unions are in a very stable financial position at this time, and that there is no issue of any instability or any financial issues within the credit union movement. There are some governance issues that are taking place, as I said, as in any other business entity. Unfortunately, they have read its head in the public domain. But at the league, we are very clear in our minds that the cooperative credit union movement is very stable, it's very viable, it's very sustainable, and it is not one that where members could be of any fear that their funds are not being properly managed. It has been properly managed, and it is in a very stable and financial position. So we want to give the assurance to the public that the confidence that we must continue to have in this noble people-centered movement is there. The league will continue to ensure that the movement remains strong, viable, and is the best option to give people that trust for financial independence.
Mr. Joseph Remy, President of the Cooperative Credit Union League, thank you very much for joining me on AM Prime this morning, sir. And, as per the developments that may take place between June and September, as it relates to that policy document mentioned earlier, I'm sure there will be a lot more to discuss in the coming months. But for now, I appreciate your time, sir, and keep well.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy for the opportunity to have this discussion, and I hope we will continue in the future to have discussions on the way forward for the cooperative credit union movement in Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.